The Man Who Hated Sins. News of Randall's recovery enthralled staff member at his former place of work. At Camel One Petroleum, his former employer, Randall was instrumental in the company's rapid expansion in the country and regionally. And when he was retired on health grounds, his absence was immensely felt in the petroleum industry. This loss for Camel One presented as a gain for their competitors. Edo, his former human capital manager, was ecstatic upon receipt of the good news, looking to having him resume his former position. But this was not to be. Randall apologized to her for the disappointment. He explained that since somebody else had already taken up his former position, it would be grossly unfair to unseat the new occupant. Even as insatiably eager to have Randall back, Edo did not hesitate to take up his offer as an advisor to his proposed God Hates Fools Foundation, GHFF. The offices of GHFF are replete with images of relevance to troubled people seeking peace. Hanging on the right side wall of the office's reception is an image of a sad-looking young girl in tattered clothes carrying a plastic bag stuffed with clothes. On the left side wall hangs another picture of a combative couple on the verge of committing murder. The man in the picture has a crucifix hanging from his neck and a Bible in the right hand, the same hand set to slap the wife. The church wives' union scarf-clad wife is generously armed with a kitchen knife raised on her right hand and a pen on her left hand, equally ready for combat. Born in rural Kenya, Randall's parents were staunch Christians. His father, Jackson, a high school principal, was also a renowned farmer and prominent businessman. His mother, Leah, had for 5 years served as a police inspector before quitting the force to help in the management of the family businesses and farming activities. Jackson and his wife were confirmed elders of their church. Their only children were Randall and younger sister Stella. The Jackson family was the envy of the community. Besides providing employment to locals in their farms, chain hardware shops and agro-vet outlets, this couple was remarkably philanthropic. Countless are the times the Jacksons' names had been floated for elective and honorary positions in community service. But all these Jackson had declined, arguing that they already had too much in their hands. Undeniably, Jackson would have been extremely delighted to serve his people, but he figured that being as busy as he was, he may not be efficient enough to give the people the service they deserved, an outcome he would consider deceptive and therefore sinful. These are some of the considerations for the people that endeared this model family to them. And so, when a tragedy was reported in this family, people at first stubbornly refused to believe an eyewitness's account. Seated in his office at GHFF, Randall was telling his story to a gravely battered Betty seated on the homely client's seat across his desk. Betty was visiting to seek for guidance in her troubled and dysfunctional marriage. Like always, Randall started with his clarion call to hate lovingly. In hating lovingly, Randall urged partners to part ways amicably, other than causing each other any physical or psychological harm. And this was Randall's story, a story he never got tired telling anyone who cared to listen. You see, Betty, I was born in a prominent Christian family. My dad was the chairman of the church finance committee and my mom the head of the church wives union. Together with my late sister Stella, we were a family of 4. Our family was the envy of the community, and villagers consulted my parents whenever they needed advice on financial, family and even political direction. Betty was all ears, with her eyes trained on Randall, although her roughed-up face made her visibly uneasy. Randall picked a fountain pen and started drawing abstract images on a notepad, not even looking at the notepad, and continued. Birds of a feather maybe do not necessarily flock together after all, Betty. Viewed from outside, the Jackson house was a hub of bliss, but those who lived inside would tell a different story if given a chance and assured of witness protection. In view of the difficulties our family was going through and the resultant trauma on us, the children, my grandparents who lived across the fence had repeatedly asked Dad and Mum to separate for some time to give each other some time to establish a lasting solution for their troubled marriage. Grandmother was ruthlessly honest and considered divorce the ultimate solution to the mess. But Dad would have none of this, wondering what fellow church members, the Christian fraternity and the community at large would say. Besides this, he argued that God hates divorce, a cardinal sin he would not be party to. Mum on the other hand made it clear that she was part of the family, and at her age and as a Christian she had no desire to get into other relationships while her husband lived. That would be adulterous, she opined. Besides, she was head of the Church Wives' Union, a position she cherished. The couple was thus left alone. All this time Betty was silent, keenly listening. Her still gaze was now on the image of the young girl with a bag of clothes, the same image hanging on the reception wall. The image placed on Randall's desk is smaller in size with a golden frame. This image you are staring at is a symbolic drawing of my late and only sister Stella. If only my parents had heeded my grandparents' advice, beautiful Stella would still be alive. After having been dumped by our uncle in town, we had nowhere to go and resorted to sleeping on the streets and rummaging rubbish bins for food. Occasionally well-wishers would buy us food, but such luck was rare and far between. But what dealt little Stella her last blow was exposure, the harsh weather in the streets. And so when she caught pneumonia she was already too weak to pull through. With other street dwellers we tried our best, and using a handcart managed to get her to hospital in the dead of the night. On arrival at the hospital gate, the security officer asked, "Whose child is this?" The 10 or so of us who had taken her there said ours in unison. Uncaringly, he told us that it's too late and asked us to place her on a stretcher strategically placed a few meters away. He then went for a green sheet, covered her and looked at each one of us with discernible amusement. We have countless cases like these every day. This is the 8th or 9th today and the day is still not over yet. The police will take care of this. You may go back to wherever you came from. We were whisked out of the hospital with a stern warning that none of us should be seen within a kilometer radius of the hospital compound. Randall placed the pen on the table and supported his clean-shaven chin with his right hand. 13th August, 30 years ago at my age of 10 and my sister aged 7 will remain etched in my mind forever. It was during school holidays, a time when Dad would spend his days visiting his various businesses. My mum on the other hand set out to check on an ongoing project on one of our farms. Since they were going different ways, Dad drove his saloon car while Mum drove away in the pickup truck used for farm transport. It was quite unusual for my parents to get late, but on this day my mum was the first to get home at around 8 o'clock in the evening. When she got to the gate, she did not wait for our live-in farm worker to open the gate for her. Instead she had opened the gate herself, drove in, and once inside left the car again and closed the gate. This seemingly simple act struck the farm worker watching from the cow shed where he was smoking marijuana as peculiar. Firstly, it took longer than reasonable, and secondly, he thought he saw a man drag something out of the driver's cabin. This he, however, brushed off as illusionary on account of his indulgence in alcohol and marijuana, a habit he had severally been warned against lately. When Mum entered the house, the first thing she did was head to the bathroom for a shower and instructed our house help to wash the clothes she had worn that day. She then reached for her phone and called Dad, only to get a number unreachable notification. A second and third attempt to reach Dad returned the same message. Now visibly worried and disappointed, she started ranting about an uncaring husband who did not care about feelings of his wife and children. Following next was a series of marathon phone calls to my grandparents, uncles, church members, and any of my dad's acquaintances she could think of, asking about his whereabouts. Of all these, none seemed to provide any useful lead. And now, having given up on her wayward husband, she told my sister and I, the house help and the farm worker, to go to bed and forget about an adult who ought to have the presence of mind not to put other people in distress. Randall's spectacles were getting misty. He removed them and wiped the lenses using a serviette. He then put them back on and continued. Before the farm worker went to bed, he remembered that he had left his lighter at the cow shed. Since he would need it the following morning to light up marijuana before leaving bed, he walked out to go and fetch it. At this point he heard a vehicle purring softly at the gate. He walked to the gate stealthily and from a distance saw Dad's car with both front doors open and the lights still on. At first he was hesitant to move closer, but when he gathered enough courage, he lit a torch. He had to inspect the area. The sight of my dad's dead body hit the farm worker like a thunderbolt, sobering him up instantly. Next to the body was my mum's left shoe of a pair she always carried under the pickup passenger seat, and a bottle of skin lotion. A trail on the ground indicated that the body had been dragged from the direction heading homewards to the gate and not from the gate homewards, as the vehicle outside the gate was ostensibly meant to suggest. The farm worker's initial idea to notify Mum of this discovery was discouraged by the presence of Mum's personal items at the scene. Now even more dazed by the effects of alcohol and marijuana, he decided that the best thing to do was leave the compound that very moment. He jumped over the fence to start his journey to safety. He was approaching the local police post a kilometer from home when it dawned on him that this move would implicate him in what was clearly a murder. He turned right and entered the police post. The officer on duty at the report desk did not respond to the farm worker's greetings but took time to study him from head to toe. Satisfied with whatever findings he got, he reminded the farm worker of a report made by Mum to the police about the worker's substance abuse. On his part, the worker blurted about a disturbing discovery he had gone there to report. The police officer got dramatic. He stood up and closed his eyes. Eyes still closed, he pointed at the door and ordered, "I don't want to see this wasted body when I open my blessed eyes." The worker leapt off the stairs and disappeared in the darkness. His next port of call at a church elder's house yielded no better results, and his disturbing discovery tagline was politely dismissed as hallucinations. But before giving up and now painting with dejection and confusion, he took the disturbing discovery message to my grandparent. Luckily, my grandmother had the patience to seek to know what the disturbing discovery was about. The farm worker did not disclose everything to them, but instead asked them to ask my uncle, who lived next to them, to accompany him to some place he did not disclose. The sight of my dad's lifeless body genuinely shocked my uncle. His reaction to the loss of life was in total contrast to his negative and indifferent attitude towards our family. After studying the scene and the vehicle outside, he reached for his phone and called the police. It took less than 5 minutes for the officers to arrive. Among them was the one the farm worker had encountered earlier at the police post. The officers wrote down details of the scene and took photos of relevant items of evidence, including Dad's car, from different angles. This they did in silence, only occasionally consulting among themselves in whispers. Seemingly satisfied with their initial findings, the officers, 1 female and 2 male, would now open their ears and mouths to my uncle, the farm worker, and other 3 neighbors who had since been called over by my uncle. The female officer started by asking my uncle the time the gruesome act took place, whereupon my uncle pointed at the farm worker standing behind. All eyes now shifting to the worker, he moved forward and corrected the officer that nobody there at that point in time could tell with absolute certainty when or where my dad met his death. The female officer concurred and urged him on. The worker told all that he had witnessed as he stood at the cowshed just a few meters away. He claimed to have seen Mum driving in and stopping to close the gate, a man dragging something, and later my dad's car being abandoned at the gate. Asked by the officer with blessed eyes what he was doing at the cowshed at night, he explained that he had gone there to enhance the sanctity of his body and soul. Prodded further, he gave a near-graphic account of his daily sacred ritual, which involved smoking what he referred to as the holy herb and burning of incense. The blessed eyes officer was packing the shoe and lotion in an exhibits bag when the female officer asked the worker whether he had ever seen the shoe. The worker identified the shoe as Mum's and added that even all the animals on the farm could confirm that fact. In the female officer's mind, dots had already started getting joined. When she wondered aloud how the shoe could have found its way at the scene, the worker volunteered his thoughts of the shoe having dropped from the pickup driver's cabin. He further explained that Mum usually removed the high-heeled shoes and changed into sandals, which she preferred when driving. The shoes would be kept under the passenger seat only to be used again when walking far from the car. The female officer, blessed eyes, my uncle, and the farm worker walked to the house, leaving 1 officer and the neighbors behind to guard the crime scene. When they got to the house, Mum took time to open the door. At the sight of the police, Mum asked why they would lock up Dad and deny him access to his phone. This the female officer denied politely and in turn asked her when she last saw or spoke to Dad. She said that they last saw each other in the morning and had not spoken since. The officer then removed the shoe and skin lotion from the exhibit's bag. When asked whether she could identify the shoe and the lotion, Mum flatly denied and loudly wondered what that insinuated. When asked for the car keys, she told them that the doors were not locked and that they could take whatever they wanted or drive the car away if they so wished. On the floor of the driver cabin of the pickup, the first thing that came to view was my dad's broken spectacles as identified by my uncle and the worker. Further search under the seats yielded the right shoe to complete the pair of shoes. The female officer, who had all along maintained her sanity and politeness, shook her head and looked Mum in the eyes. Calmly she addressed Mum. "Inspector, this is unbelievably amateurish for a trained investigator and a criminology degree holder like you." She had bitten her index finger hard in anger and shook her head again to emphasize disbelief. "Anyway, those that the gods would destroy they first made mad and blind to obvious facts. Inspector, we take it that you are a person of interest in this matter. I am sorry you are now under arrest." After having been read her rights as a suspect, Mum remained composed and made a request to be allowed to pick some items from her bedroom. In view of her composure, this request was granted. After 2 minutes in the bedroom, a gunshot was heard. My mum, who was a licensed gun holder, had shot herself dead. On the dressing table in my parents' bedroom, she left a note apologizing to us, the children, and all the people who cared. She claimed not to have known what came over her, even as she accepted full responsibility for the tragedy. Curiously, she exonerated the devil and asked people to leave it alone and not drag its name in matters it had no idea about. 2 weeks after my parents were buried, our uncle offered to take us to our maternal grandparents' place for a visit. Going to their place meant that we had to pass through the city since my mum came from a different part of the country, although both my parents are classed in the same ethnic group. When we arrived in the city, our uncle offered to buy us lunch. He ordered French fries, beef, and fruit juice for each of us and a soft drink for himself. Before he could even taste his soft drink, he excused himself to make a call outside as the restaurant was too noisy for him. That was the last time we saw him. With no money and no idea of where we were headed, we just sat outside the restaurant into the night, where a friendly street boy found us and offered us a place in some back street to hide for the night. This was to be our new home. That night it occurred to me that blood may not be thicker than water after all. After the death of my sister, I decided to trace my way back home. But the road I thought was way home led me to a sparsely populated pastoral community. Before darkness set in, I saw a home some distance away and hurried that way. Once there, the first thing Simon, the polygamous owner of the home, did was instruct his first wife Helen to give me food. After a meal that reminded me of home and my sister, his second wife Cecilia prepared a hot bath for me. Before I went to take a bath, I had told my whole story to all members of this family. The following morning, when 4 of the 6 children were leaving for school, Simon told me that I too should get ready for school the following day. That way I got good education, a home, new and wonderful family, and became a son of 2 great fathers. Randall stood up from his seat and as he walked out asked Betty to follow him. They walked out of his office, down a corridor past a few other offices, and walked into a marriage counselor's office. Here, Betty was introduced to matronly Regina the counselor. Betty and Regina exchanged pleasantries like old friends. Regina was known to have a way in breaking the ice with strangers. Before Randall could leave the two for Betty's first session, he invoked the Foundation's mission. Arms interlocked across his chest, he looked Betty in the eyes and addressed her. Here at GHFF, we strive to inculcate sensible thought process in people in difficult circumstances. We ask people to be wise and give dialogue and reconciliation a chance while the opening lasts. Our foundation does not advocate separation or divorce, but your situation assessed against our proposals should surely guide you which way to go. He turned his head and, facing the wall behind Regina's, pointed at the foundation motto inscribed there. As you can see, Betty, even as God in Malachi chapter 2 verse 16 hates divorce. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verses 4 to 6, God explicitly hates fools. To reaffirm his conviction, Randall stressed his point as he wiped his misty glasses: God hates fools more than he does divorce.